And the prompt is, are you stuck in a rut? Uninspired? Then maybe you need the assistance of working from a prompt. And that's what I'm going to do today. So I'm in my Playing with Prompts book. I'll link that video in the description box where I make the journal. And I'm using my Pick a Prompt cards. These are available for digital download from NINNYSNAPKINS.com. I'll link that in the description box. There's 100 prompts there, so you have lots of inspiration. So the prompt that I am going to work on is crown. And on the left-hand side, I have the prompt. I've done a little brainstorming, but I was wanting to use that quote. When my dentist told me I needed a crown, I was like, I know, right? I found a couple other quotes about crowns, and then I decided to use this printable. Although you could use a magazine girl, you could use a Julie Nutting stamp, whatever. Now, as luck would have it, I actually have a crown stamp, and I just fitted it on her head. So I'm just going to add that to my focal image. But again, you can go to Pinterest and download a printable of a crown, size it to whatever size you need, and away you go. I'm sure you could even draw one. So on my desk, I was cleaning up and I just had these random pieces of music paper. So I decided, you know what? I'm just going to use them. I don't know if anything's going to show up at the end of it, but I'm just going to add it. It's going to add some texture. It might add pattern if it peeks through. I'm going to glue this down with my fluid matte medium. Now, 90% of the time, I gesso my pages ahead of time. I did not. This is raw paper. I'm going to glue this down. Wherever I put the fluid matte medium, that's going to make a non-porous surface, so the paint is going to go on that a little bit differently than if it was raw paper. But I'm just all about the randomness. Quick, easy. I have a limited amount of time. This page only took about 30 minutes. Now I'm picking a color scheme. I'm using Brilliant Purple and Cadmium Red. Odd color combo, but I love how these two mix together. So I'm going to put some of that on the palette and then, oh, you know what? I need to tape off the exterior just to keep it a little bit neater. I'm not overly fussy. So, and yes, this tape I've used before. I use it for multiple pages, multiple times. Nothing goes to waste. And then with my finger, with a makeup sponge, I'm just going to mix the red and the purple and maybe some white gesso right on the page. It's going to mix wet on wet, especially where there's a non-porous surface. So wherever I put the fluid medium, it's going to stay wet and allow me to blend. Whereas if there's raw paper, it's going to soak into the paper before it allows me to do that. So because my background has kind of a mixture of that, it's going to give a different effect. And I love that. That is an easy way of adding interest to your background without even doing any extra work. So here I'm just grabbing out some gesso to use. And I'm just using the makeup sponge. And at this point, a lot of the music notes are peeking through. They're showing up, and they do show up at the end of the page as well when you look in real life in close-up. But remember, these first layers are just that, first layers. Not everything needs to show, or do you even want it to show? And really, I have no idea of what kind of background I want. I wanted a bright, colorful background with that sassy saying with crown. So here I'm just beefing up the colors, adding more layers of the purple to get that darker purple because it was very light in places, adding more red. And so you have lots of tones. You've got several tones of red, several tones of purple. So I cut out my girl and cut out some of my quote here. And I want to get rid of some of that white on the quote. And that's what you see me doing here. I want to eliminate it. I don't want it to overtake the focal image. So I'm cutting that up, seeing what can I do with this quote. I'm thinking to put some of it on the left-hand side and the other part on the right-hand side. and I'm rearranging it. And right about now, I'm thinking to myself, I think I used too big of a font. I need to shrink this quote down a little bit. It's a little more too heavy compared to my focal image, where all you're seeing is the quote. So I shrunk it down, changed the font a little bit there, and cut it out again. You don't need to see me cut it out. And I like how the smaller size fits on the page. So now I'm ready to think about adding to this background. And I'm going to do some stamping and stenciling, add some more pattern. So I have this, it's basically text of some sort. I'm putting on black acrylic paint and I'm just stamping on this. The goal here isn't to get a perfect stamp. The goal here is to get pattern, texture, interest in the background. And I add a little contrast with the black. Just applying the black paint with a makeup sponge and just grunging this up. Now, because there's texture under there, remember the music paper? It's a little uneven, and that's going to affect how the stamping works. So now I want to add a little bit of white, and I'm using this stencil. Now I'm going with a crown, and this stencil called Scroll Work from the Crafter's Workshop kind of reminded me of ornate, of crowns, of royalty, vintage. And so I'm adding white. I think I'm using white gesso here because I had it on my palette, but you can use white paint. It may be it's going to give you more of an opaque finish. I'm just adding this in a few areas and then adding more as I go. I like how some of this is very faded, some of it's a little more opaque. And again, you're building in interest. And just extending it, liking how this is looking. And I grab this star stamp. It's just a good basic, and I'm adding a little bit more black contrast. I want to see a little bit more, but I want something small scale, which is why I chose this star stamp. In front of me, I have a collection of random stamps, very neutral, use on any page kind of stamps that I can use. Every once in a while, I clean that out. I throw a few others in there just to use the stamps, to remind myself. And then I thought, because again, I'm royalty, I want gold. I'm going to colorize the crown gold. I'm adding the same stamp, the star stamp, with gold. Now, gold is very translucent, but I wanted that little bit of shimmer and shine in the background to tie into the crown that's going to be part of my focal image. I like how the gold plays off of these colors. So even if I wasn't doing royalty, um, using the gold in some way with these background colors works really well. Once that's dry, I put my focal image back and my finalize where I want the sentiment to go. So now it says, my dentist told me I needed a crown. And I'm like, I know, right? Which is very timely because this week I will be going to the dentist and finding out about the crown to put on my dental implant. So I'm gluing everything down with my fluid matte medium, and I'm putting a coat on top because I am going to colorize this girl. She is just printed out on plain copy paper, nothing fancy. And if I'm going to do any shading on her or coloring, I want to seal that paper. And I use the fluid matte medium because it does go matte. So now I want to make some gold to stamp my crown out. And I could have just done one little area to stamp one little crown, but when I've got the paint out, when I'm doing this, the stamp is going to be dirty. The cleanup is going to be the same. So I always stamp more than what I need. And then I have a bin of leftovers of, that kind of thing that I can use. Also, I've learned that if I plan to just stamp one, it doesn't necessarily work out. Something messes up. It's imperfect. I want something different. And this gives me options. So here I'm using black acrylic paint that I'm brayering onto my stamp to get a nice even coat because I want this to be more perfect stamping than what I did when I stamped before. I didn't care when it was in my background if it was perfect. And then I decide, I'm going to stamp some on the white paper. This is a piece of copy paper. I think I printed out sentiments on it, so there's printing on the other side. It's just in the recycle bin. So again, the theme of use it up, use whatever you have. So I'm just going to give that a dry, and I'm always, always, always clean the acrylic stamp before I move on. So now I'm ready to colorize the girl. I could have left her black and white, but she's pretty faded. So I'd have to beef up the line. So I decided I am going to colorize her. So I have a pre-mixed craft paint that is a flesh color, so I'm choosing to start with that. And I'm just applying that with a small brush. Nothing too fancy here. I'm not stressing about the paint colors. You could use pit markers. You could use Inktense blocks. I'm just using acrylic paint. Here I'm painting their hair yellow. This golden yellow oxide color, again, ties in with the gold. But I am thinking that the crown, because it's gold, is going to get a little lost with her blonde hair. So I plan to add some highlights and darken that up. This is just the base coat of color. For her dress, I decide to go with a darker purple. Again, I want the focal image to tie in with my background. So even though it's a different shade of purple, I'm just adding that purple there. Alternatively, I could have cut a gel print and made her part of her dress or shirt out of that and just glued that on. And here I've grabbed my fine line brush with some brown paint that I've thinned a little bit, and I'm just adding some lines, some highlights, lowlights, or not necessarily highlights, some shadows and hair, and giving it some movement, going over the page. Again, I'm not being too particular here. Don't stress the small things. Now, when you're working from a prompt like Crown, anything goes. I chose to go with this quote. That's what spoke to me. But that is not necessarily the only way of doing it. You could take this anyway. As long as it makes sense to you, it's correct. You could go as literal or as abstract as you want. Now for the dress, I wanted some pattern, so I grabbed this stencil. It's a flower stencil. I'm using the center of it to stencil these dots onto my girl's shirt. So, when you're looking at a stencil, yes, this is a flower, but there's a very interesting motif and pattern in there. So look at your stencils not as what they are, but what little motifs they have. So I'm painting the lips of my girl, the same red that's in the background. Again, you want everything to tie together. Don't introduce another color. And then I'm using my angle brush and just adding some brown shading around the face. And again, I'm not too particular. I'm probably not following any particular rules of how to shade properly, where the where the light should hit or anything. I do it and I try to make it look good to me. Grab my Posca pen and I'm just adding some eyebrows and I'm darkening the eyes and the glasses. Now, I could have painted the glasses, I could have made them purple, I could have made them any color, and I might use this girl again and do just that. So once you find a good basic printable, you can tweak it, change the dress, change the color of the hair, change the length of the hair. Um, this is my little cheat for, those of us who we don't draw. Now I'm just shading around the outside with black acrylic paint, and that just frames my picture. Finishing 101. And there, put on my crown. Do I want the black and white crown or I want the gold crown? I was going to go with gold, but the black and white one works itself. Again, not a right or wrong decision, just which way I chose to go this time. Giving that a dry, I did a little more shading, so her hair is considerably darker, just so the crown shows up a little bit more. But of course, it's got that shimmer and shine being gold. And I just glue that down with my fluid matte medium. Do a little shading around the sentiment just to make that stand out a little bit more. Just turning the page, whatever makes it easier for me to do. Take off the tape and the page is done. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I had some fun. It didn't take very long, 30 minutes at most. The prompt was crown and my colors, brilliant purple, light purple, and cadmium red. So I challenge you. Use the prompt, crown, or use the color scheme. Then go to my Facebook page and let me see what you've done. Until next time, go get creative.